This video is brought to you by ExpressVPN, keeping you secure and anonymous online and helping you unlock restricted content anywhere in the world. An ad and sponsorship-free version of this video is available through my Patreon, in addition to my entire back catalog, ad and sponsorship-free, as well as behind-the-scenes content, Q&As, and a whole bunch of other stuff. So if you're at all curious, head on over to my Patreon to check it out. In part 2 of this 3-part series, focusing on the conservation of this rather large and regal portrait, we begin the reversal process. And that is, we take all of the information that we gathered in episode 1, everything about the surface coating, the varnish, the adhesives used, the structural issues, and we take that information and we start acting on it. And the first thing that I need to do is remove the painting from the stretcher support. And that means that I have to remove all 10,485,321.5 staples. I have this nifty little tool that allows me to pull them a bit faster than if I were using a screwdriver or a palette knife. But it's still a tedious process. And that's one of the reasons why I'm so, how shall we say, unfond of staples. The ease with which somebody can shoot off 1,000 staples is just baffling, and it often leads to an excessive number being used, for no benefit whatsoever. It's not as if more staples is more better. Each staple makes 2 holes in the canvas. In addition, the horizontal bar that connects those 2 studs can create a crease or a cut in the canvas. And so the staple can actually do more damage than is benefit. Now, as much as I dislike staples, they are actually not the worst thing in the world. I know that may come as a surprise because I often rant and rave about staples. But in my long career of doing this, I have seen paintings secured to stretchers with glue, with silicone adhesive, with screws, with ring shank nails. I've seen just about everything, and so while staples are frustrating, they are at least reversible and removable. Yes, it's a pain, but imagine scraping off silicone adhesive from the back of a canvas. That's a whole nother level of masochism. But even the process of removing these staples, as many as they are, is instructive, because I'm starting to learn a little bit more about this canvas and just how brittle it really is. You see, this canvas was lined, and I suspect that it was lined for some damage, but also to address the fact that it's very, very thin and probably was verging on the edge of decomposing. Now, I could probably deduce this from any other point, but having an up-close personal experience with the actual tacking edge and removing all of these staples really puts the point on just how fragile this canvas is. I have a rubber band ball that my father started back in 1978 or so, and at this point it is almost the size of a basketball, and I keep adding to it. And maybe I should start a staple ball and see how big that grows in the next 20 years. Maybe see if my kids will want that one day. Who knows? And now with all of those staples finally removed, I can take the stretcher off of the canvas. And I'm going to be careful here because, A, I don't know if I've caught all those staples, and I don't want one of them to hang up. But also, I mentioned that this canvas is pretty brittle, and I'm going to take my time just to make sure that it doesn't get any unnecessary stress. So I'm going to peel back this lining canvas. And this lining canvas is heavily saturated with wax, making it fairly flexible. Now, I'm not concerned if the lining canvas gets damaged. I'm just concerned about the original canvas. Now, once I'm confident that nothing is stuck and there's no hidden fasteners, I can lift up that stretcher and remove it from the painting. And it's easier to lift the stretcher out of the painting than it is to lift the painting off of the stretcher. See that the canvas didn't really move at all. Now I'll set the stretcher aside, and I don't have anything to do on it right now, but I will later when I come back to it. Now, at this point, I'm going to peel back the corner just to see a little bit about the linings. And to my surprise, and actually as a great turn of events, it turns out that this painting doesn't have two linings. What it has is one lining over a strip lining. And a strip lining is just where the edge has been lined. That little white strip of fabric is just to reinforce the tacking edge. And so it looks like during the last conservation, that old work wasn't removed, it was simply worked over. And the whole painting, including the strip lining, was lined to this new canvas. Not a practice that I would encourage or recommend, but it is certainly better than what I had expected of having to remove two full linings. Now, it does throw a little wrench in the system because the procedures and orders that I thought I was going to take have to be modified. Initially, I was going to remove these linings after facing the painting, but now knowing that there's just one lining, I can change up how I'm going to approach it. And so I'm going to start cleaning the painting first. Now, in episode 1, I determined that there really wasn't much surface grime on this painting at all, and so I didn't need to do a surface grime removal. I could just go right ahead and start removing the varnish. And I'm starting in the armor because there's a high concentration of white in that area of the painting, and because I know precisely what solvent and what ratio will work on this area, because I made a test there. I also want to see just how dramatic the transformation is going to be, and, well, I'm pretty sure you do too. So as I expose the old varnish to the solvent, I can not only feel it swelling up and getting sticky, but I can hear it change. When I roll the swab over an area of varnish, it's very smooth and quiet. And as the varnish lifts off and I get down to the original paint layer, it becomes louder and sounds a little bit more abrasive or scratchy. And with one of his arms cleaned, we can see just how yellowed that old varnish is. And in fact, as I'm working on this painting, I suspect that there's not one layer of varnish, but multiple layers. It seems that whomever worked on this painting last just didn't take the old varnish off. They left it on when they did the lining, which is why it was compressed or ultra smooth, as I mentioned in the first episode. And then they simply varnished over it, probably to give it a shinier or refreshed appearance. Again, not anything that I would recommend, and really a measure of sloppy work. And as I continue with the cleaning process, it's amazing what reveals itself. We can see that the sitter's true skin tone is not so jaundiced. He's actually pretty healthy looking. We can also see all of these beautiful colors come to the fore. In addition, all of the delicacy of the brushwork can now manifest itself, and the talent of the artists can become prominent. And that's really what the cleaning process is all about. Revealing the work of the artist, the hand of the artist, revealing the sitter and their personality. So in some ways, the cleaning process is about revelation and showing the truth of the artist, the sitter, and the painting. And I don't think that there would ever be a case where I would argue that concealing something would be of benefit to anybody with the painting. I mean, it's not like we're talking about personal information when you're browsing online, because that's definitely a case where you don't want to reveal everything. Because let's be honest, there are hackers and even your own ISP who are out there ready to take advantage of your personal information. They can see all the sites you're visiting, even if you clear your browser history or use incognito mode, and are legally allowed to sell this information to advertisers. But that's where ExpressVPN comes in, because they'll route and shield your traffic through any number of their thousands upon thousands of trusted servers all over the world, thus making sure that any data you transmit is encrypted and secure from prying eyes. And ExpressVPN is routinely rated the #1 VPN service by tech journals all over the world, so you know you're in good hands. So to find out how you can get 3 months free, click on the link below in the description box, expressvpn.com/Julian. And as I continue cleaning this painting, particularly the areas of white and highlight, I'm amazed at not just how dirty and yellow the painting was, but how flat it was. You see, there was this weird grid-like texture all over the entire painting as a result of multiple layers of varnish being built up. And with that removed, we can start to see the delicacy of the brushwork, the color, and the volume being created. And that's really the magic of any artist, is taking something two-dimensional, canvas and paint, and creating three-dimensional volume and space out of it. And discolored varnish and surface grime can flatten that space. They can remove the complexities of the color, and they can make it seem lifeless. And so now, as I finish up his collar, I've gathered a lot of information about this varnish and cleaning this painting, and I'm ready to tackle what is arguably the most important part: the face. Now, cleaning the face is always an exciting prospect because we're actually going to see what this sitter looked like. We're going to see the drama in his expression and see how the artist captured it. And having cleaned thousands upon thousands of paintings, I have a pretty good sense of what I'm looking at through the varnish. I can see this discolored paint and have a pretty good idea of what it's going to look like after it's cleaned. But I will tell you, every time I do it, it's still exciting. I still get a great kick out of seeing these beautiful skin tones, these highlights, these shadows come to life. Painting faces is hard. Just about anybody can paint one, but to capture an expression is truly, truly difficult. And so seeing that expression come to life is really, really exciting. Now, one thing that I am noticing when I work on this face is that it is remarkably similar to the rest of the painting. Now, I mentioned in episode 1 that Thomas Murray was a face painter. That is, he often painted the face after his studio or assistants painted the rest of the painting. He gave them the grunt work and he took all of the fun stuff for himself. I don't blame him. There are many days when I don't want to sweep the floor in the studio and I wish I could just farm that out, but that's a whole nother story. Anyhow, what I am seeing is the application of paint, the brushwork, the color, the whole gestalt of this painting isn't really different from the rest of the painting. I would have come to expect that the face would have been painted in a manner that was dissimilar to the rest of the work. And I'm not finding that, which is interesting, and it either leads me to believe that Murray and his studio were so in sync that there is no perceptible difference, or maybe Murray painted this whole painting himself, or maybe Murray didn't paint this painting at all. I don't know, but it's something that has been nagging me since I started working on this face. Now, one of the other things that we've revealed is a pretty nasty tear right on his cheek, going up into his eye. Now, I saw some of this retouching when I did the blacklight examination, but I didn't realize that it was this big. That old varnish was making it really hard for the blacklight to penetrate and reveal some of that old retouching. So this, unlike the surprise of finding only an edge lining instead of two linings, is not welcome. This is an unfortunate revelation. But it's not going to throw me. I can deal with that later on. What I need to do now is scrape off some of these little areas where there is residue of surface grime or old varnish that just didn't come off with the solvent. And I don't want to keep scrubbing this painting with the solvent because I don't feel that there's going to be anything gained from exposing this paint to more solvent. You see, there is a point at which the solvent can start to attack the original paint, and that's something I want to avoid. So by taking this scalpel, which has a brand new, very sharp blade, and just gliding it over the surface, I can lift off some of these little pieces of residue without doing any damage to the painting. It's tedious and delicate work, and not something that I enjoy all that much, but it's necessary. Now, I have a feeling that there's going to be a lot of scraping in my future on this painting, and again, while I don't love it, it is just part of the process. And, of course, it could always be worse. Rather than an old varnish with a little bit of surface grime mixed in, it could be polyurethane. And we know how that turned out. Now, while we're talking about scraping, there is more, of course, to scrape. The edges of this painting were once wrapped in a paper tape. And that's not uncommon. Framers do that. Conservators used to do that to tidy up the edges. I don't do it because I think it's ridiculous and it makes a mess and it's not necessary. And of course, in the last conservation, they didn't remove this paper tape. They just left it and they varnished over it, which makes it much more difficult to remove because that varnish prevents any water from penetrating through the paper and softening up the adhesive. So what was a potentially easy removal now must be scraped off. And again, this is a sign of just lazy or sloppy work. And, well, you know how I feel about that. So I'll continue to scrape all of this paper tape off the edges. And even though this is probably going to be covered by the frame rabbit, really, quality work is determined not necessarily by what you don't see, but what nobody sees. And that's why I want to make sure that I take care of everything. Now, I mentioned that I pivoted my approach when I saw that this painting didn't have two linings. Initially, I was going to face the painting with Kozo, and then remove the linings, and then clean the painting. But since it only has one lining on it, I felt that it would be okay and safe to forego the facing. But I needed to clean the old varnish off, because to remove the wax lining, I need to apply heat to the painting. And I don't want to subject that varnish to any more heat. We saw what happened the first time when it was subjected to heat and it got flattened and depressed. I don't want to do that, and that's why I cleaned the painting first. So I can lay the painting down on my hot table, and then I can bring the temperature up just a little bit. And once it's reached an appropriate temperature that causes the wax to soften, I can begin peeling back the lining. Now again, to my benefit, and really this is very lucky, this is just a straight beeswax lining. There's no resin in this wax. And wax resin linings are much, much better than straight wax linings. In fact, wax linings by themselves really aren't all that effective. It is the combination of wax and resin that creates a very strong adhesive bond. Wax in and of itself, well, not so much. This lining was just plain beeswax. And so it comes off very easily and actually isn't that bad to work over. It's a cool day, and so sitting over the hot table is kind of okay, and beeswax smells pretty nice. So this is one of those rare circumstances where the painting is actually giving me some pleasant surprises. So thank you, painting. I appreciate it. Now, after I've peeled back the lining, I'm going to remove some of the adhesive. And in doing so, I notice that there's something written on the back of this painting. It looks like an inscription. But that inscription doesn't say Prince George of Hesse-Darmstadt. That said General Hamilton. So I'm not sure exactly what's going on, but I'm going to have to figure it out. Anyhow, I've removed some of the wax residue with a solvent, and this is not the final step in removing this wax. It's just an opportunity to remove what's there while it's warm. And now I can start to remove this strip lining. And this is done with water to soften up that rabbit skin glue. Now, unfortunately, that wax has penetrated into this fabric, and it makes this water less effective than it would be had the lining not been added on. As the adhesive softens and weakens its bond, I can start to peel back this strip lining. And this strip lining was not executed with a traditional canvas. Rather, it is what appears to be cotton muslin, which is a lighter weight cotton fabric that is often used by tailors and clothing designers to mock up patterns or in linings of suit jackets and other places where a lesser quality fabric is needed. In any event, whether it's canvas, whether it's silk, whether it's muslin, it needs to go. It has no place, and it gets in the way of the next procedure. So I have to pull this back slowly. And working in small sections, I can make sure that I'm not putting any unnecessary stress on the original canvas, which again, I think is pretty brittle. So I want to take extra precaution. Now with all of the muslin strip lining removed, I can start to remove the adhesive. And this is going to be much easier because I don't have a wax-saturated fabric preventing the water from reaching the adhesive. And the wax saturation of the original canvas is actually going to work to my benefit here. Because it's so saturated with wax, it is impervious to water. It is waterproof. And so I don't have to worry so much about any excess water getting on the canvas, being absorbed by the canvas, and then causing distortions as it evaporates, or causing the paint layer to flake off, which can be common when paintings get wet. So the wax lining is actually helping me here. Who'd have thought? Now there is no fast way to do this. It's just a lot of scraping and cleaning and more scraping. But when I finish a section, I take a cotton blotter paper and a steel weight and press it, because that area of the canvas isn't wax saturated and is vulnerable to water. So I want to make sure that the blotter paper absorbs any excess water and that the canvas is kept flat under pressure so that it doesn't distort. Now when I scrape canvas, I often will try to go on a diagonal, a 45, so that the blade isn't running with the warp or the weft of the canvas, so that it glides over the surface and doesn't catch. If I go with one direction, I run the risk that if there is a slub or a error in the weaving, that the blade will catch and that could damage the canvas. So by going on a 45, I'm trying to glide on top of the canvas. And when it works, the adhesive comes off pretty swiftly, and it's actually not all that bad. You can develop a rhythm and get into a groove, and then all of a sudden an hour or two has passed. Luckily, this is how it's working on this painting. Some paintings, they fight you, and an hour feels like 10. And as I continue on, I'm going to change out these blotter papers so that as they get wet, they get replaced with dry ones to make sure that all of that excess moisture is being absorbed. When I peeled back the lining, I found this adhesive residue surrounding the areas of the tears, which leads me to believe that there was a larger patch that was one time adhered to this canvas. And this adhesive is not receptive to water. It's some sort of chemical adhesive, so I have to use a solvent to remove it. And I have to saturate the adhesive a little bit so that it swells, and then I can scrape it off. So I've taken several cotton balls that are saturated with a solvent, and I'm placing them on the areas of the old adhesive. After a few seconds or so, the adhesive is swelled enough and soft that I can begin scraping it off with the blade. I have to move fairly quickly because I don't want to saturate this canvas too much with this solvent. So it's a delicate balance between moving fast enough that I limit the exposure and not so fast that the adhesive doesn't fully swell and become removable. Now it looks really rough. You can see all of the areas that I've scraped. The canvas looks pretty lousy, but that's just because there's still residue. And as I take the solvent and I begin to remove that residue, as the solvent evaporates, we can start to see that the damage really isn't there. Yes, there is a slight area where the canvas is a little bit lighter, but that's not necessarily because I scraped as much as it is because that area of the canvas was protected from oxidization or from the wax by this old adhesive. In any event, I want to remove all of this adhesive because I don't want it creating a bulge on the front of the painting during the next step. And so as I clean it off, you can start to see really the stain or the damaged areas don't look that bad at all, and one would be hard-pressed to even identify it as an area of damage. In fact, the canvas looks pretty good. Now with all of the adhesive, with the lining and the strip lining removed, I'm ready to go back to the hot table and finally desaturate this canvas of wax. What has been helpful thus far in protecting the canvas is now an impediment. And so I'm going to saturate the back of the canvas with a solvent. I'm going to turn the hot table on and raise it up to temperature. Then I'm going to flip the canvas over onto a brand new acid-free cotton blotter paper. And I'm going to extract the wax. This cotton blotter paper will absorb all of that waxy solvent mix when heat is applied and pressure is applied. To facilitate the pressure application, I'm going to wrap the painting with a cotton webbing. And this is going to allow me to extract the air from around the painting. The cotton webbing ties into 2 vacuum ports that are drilled through the corners of the aluminum hot table and connected to a vacuum pump. I'm going to create an envelope with this PET film, and I'm just going to tape it down so that it's airtight. And that's going to make sure that when I apply the vacuum pressure, there are no gaps or air leaks, because those can be problematic. And I'm just using basic cheapo packing tape. Ironically, I found that the cheapest tape is the best. I once went on a very expensive tape discovery expedition, ordering dozens upon dozens of different rolls of tape to find the best ones. And to my surprise, the cheapest tape was the best one. So I stick with it. Anyhow, once that envelope is created, I can turn on the vacuum pressure. And I'm not using a ton of pressure, just enough so that there's an even application on the entire surface. And what that's going to do is make sure that there's good contact with the back of the painting and the blotter paper, so that that wax solvent mixture has somewhere to go. Now, once the hot table has reached temperature, the painting's been allowed to sit, I can turn off the heat and let the painting cool to room temperature. And this is one of those reasons why I like this cheap tape. It doesn't leave any residue on the aluminum, and it doesn't tear apart. So sometimes lovely cheap materials are your best friend. Who knows? In any event, I can peel back this PET film, and I can see that it didn't stick, and that's a really good thing. And I can check to make sure there are no waves and ripples, and that's a sign that the envelope was airtight. Now I'm going to remove this painting from the blotter paper, and I'm going to transfer it over to the table in the front half of my studio. At this point, just about everything that needs to come off the painting is off, but I'm going to clean the surface once again just to make sure that any wax that was softened and bled through the painting to the face is fully removed. I don't want any of those residues on the painting. This is also a good opportunity for me to think about what work has been done and how I've had to shift, and of course what work needs to come in order to put this painting back together. I have to investigate who this artist is, who this portrait is of. I have to tell my client and figure out what they want to do. And then, of course, I have to start focusing on the actual painting and thinking about how I'm going to deal with the structural issues, the newfound inscription, and of course, all of the retouching that's coming. As always, thanks for watching. And Patreon members got this video a day early, ad and sponsorship free. In addition, they get merchandise discounts, behind-the-scenes content, additional videos, and a bunch of other surprises. So if you're at all curious what comes with a Patreon membership, head on over to my site to check it out.